The air still tasted of ozone and something acrid, a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat despite the respirator. I stood at the threshold of what used to be Dr. Aris Thorne's state-of-the-art bioengineering lab, now a monument to chaos. Twisted steel girders jutted from scorched walls like skeletal fingers. Glass, once pristine and reinforced, lay pulverized in glittering drifts across the floor, mixed with shattered equipment and unidentifiable debris. The sheer scale of destruction was breathtaking, almost artistic in its violence. Massive pressure differential. The detective, a burly man named Miller, grunted from beside me, his voice muffled by his own mask. He gestured vaguely at the mangled centrifuge, a hulking piece of machinery now resembling a crushed tin can. Looks like a containment breach. The pressure wave ripped through this entire section. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the scene. My gaze swept from the collapsed ceiling panels to the floor, where pools of dark, viscous liquid had dried into unsettling patterns. The initial reports were already circulating. A tragic accident, a brilliant mind undone by his own ambition, or perhaps a desperate act of self-destruction. Thorne was known for his reclusive nature and the intensely sensitive nature of his research. Suicide, for some, seemed a plausible, if tragic, conclusion. The medical examiner's preliminary findings leaned towards thermal trauma and massive blunt force impact consistent with an explosion. Miller continued, consulting a tablet. Body was found near the primary containment unit, what's left of it, pretty much vaporized. Vaporized. I echoed, the word tasting like ash. I stepped further into the devastation, my boots crunching on the glass and debris. The forensic team, a small, grim cohort, was already at work, meticulously tagging and bagging what little remained intact. The high-security nature of this facility meant access was tightly controlled, even now. Beyond the outer blast doors, a generator hummed, struggling to maintain emergency power. I pulled a small, high-intensity flashlight from my kit, its beam cutting through the gloom. My eyes, trained over 2 decades to spot the anomaly in the ordinary, began their dance. I didn't see an accident. I saw a story, just waiting for the right interpreter. The story of a man, Dr. Aris Thorne, who, according to all accounts, was on the cusp of a breakthrough. A breakthrough significant enough to warrant a lab like this, protected by multiple layers of biometric locks and hardened materials. A breakthrough significant enough to perhaps be worth killing for. My gaze drifted to a section of the wall near where the primary containment unit once stood. The plaster was peeled back, exposing the underlying concrete. Most of the damage here was consistent with a sudden outward blast, but something tugged at me. A subtle discoloration, a dark, almost charcoal-like stain, fanned out from a small, circular point about shoulder height on the wall. It was too localized, too precise compared to the general scorch marks from the wider explosion. It looked less like the result of an indiscriminate blast and more like the residue of an intense, focused heat source. I knelt, pulling out a specialized magnifier. The stain wasn't merely soot. It was something deeper, almost etched into the concrete itself. This wasn't right. An accidental explosion, even a catastrophic one, tends to leave a more uniform pattern of destruction. And that fleck, it seemed almost alien against the backdrop of destruction, surviving where everything else had been annihilated. It was too small, too specific to be mere debris. My thoughts raced. If this was an accident, why the localized, intense burn before the general explosion? Why that particular fleck reflecting light in such an odd way? My instincts, honed by years of sifting through the aftermath of human tragedy, screamed at me. This wasn't just a lab accident. This was something else entirely. I straightened up, my gaze sweeping the room again, now with a new lens. The initial narrative of suicide or accident, so neatly packaged by the first responders, began to fray at the edges. My skepticism, a familiar companion, settled in. I knew with a certainty that hummed in my bones that I was looking at something far more deliberate. "Miller," I called out, my voice tight with a newfound resolve. I need detailed thermal imaging of this entire section, and bring me the high-resolution vacuum kit. We have a microscopic trace I want to examine in the unit. Miller looked up from his tablet, a slight frown on his face. Trace? Read, everything in here is a trace. It's a disaster zone. No, I countered, already moving towards the exit, my mind already sifting through possibilities. This one's different. This one tells a story no one else has heard yet. I walked out of the lab, past the security checkpoints and the bewildered guards, towards the waiting vehicles. My destination was the mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene, a self-contained laboratory on wheels parked a safe distance away. That tiny, iridescent fleck and the unusual burn pattern on the concrete were my first threads. The mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene was a beast of a machine, a multi-axle trailer that had unfolded itself into a gleaming, self-sufficient laboratory. Its exterior, a muted gray, was a stark contrast to the flashing blue lights of the emergency vehicles still dotting the perimeter. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of ventilation systems and specialized equipment. A medical examiner, a woman with sharp, observant eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, was already prepping the examination table. "Glad you're here, Reed," he said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "Body just arrived. Initial assessment suggests massive trauma consistent with the blast, but I wanted your input before we go too deep." I nodded, shrugging off my outer jacket and pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled my nostrils, a welcome change from the acrid tang of the lab. Dr. Thorne's body, or what remained of it, was carefully transferred onto the stainless steel table. The damage was extensive, a testament to the sheer force of the explosion. Burns covered a significant portion of his torso and arms, and there were clear signs of blunt force trauma. On the surface, it screamed accident. "Let's start with the obvious," the medical examiner began, gesturing towards the charred remnants of Thorne's lab coat. "Thermal injuries severe, probable cause of death, traumatic asphyxia and exsanguination from internal injuries." I leaned closer, my gaze sweeping over the body, not just looking at the obvious, but searching for the unobvious. The medical examiner worked with practiced precision, documenting each injury, collecting samples of clothing, skin, and hair. My eyes, however, kept returning to the areas less affected by the primary blast. The backs of his hands, for instance, showed a different pattern of scorching than the front, almost as if he'd shielded himself. Perhaps been exposed to a secondary, smaller burst of heat. "Notice anything peculiar about the burn patterns on his left forearm?" I asked, pointing with a gloved finger. "The charring here seems contained, almost a distinct line rather than the more diffuse pattern elsewhere." The medical examiner squinted, adjusting her magnification goggles. "You're right. It's almost like a contact burn, but the surrounding tissue doesn't show the same degree of thermal damage. Odd." My internal gears began to turn. A contact burn implied something touching his skin, something that might have been held or pressed against him, rather than just ambient heat from an explosion. I moved to examine his hands more closely, paying particular attention to the fingernails. Under the bright lights of the unit, and with a powerful magnifying glass, I saw it. Tucked beneath the nail of his right index finger, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a minuscule, almost iridescent particle. It was no larger than a grain of sand with a faint, almost metallic sheen. "Hold on," I murmured, my breath catching slightly. "I've got something here." Carefully, I used a pair of fine-tipped tweezers to extract the particle, placing it onto a sterile slide. The medical examiner peered over my shoulder. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "I don't know yet," I replied, moving to the unit's microspectroscopy station. I positioned the slide, adjusted the focus, and initiated the scan. The results flashed across the screen a moment later. It wasn't organic. It wasn't a common metal. The spectral analysis revealed a complex synthetic polymer, unlike anything I'd ever encountered in a lab environment. More importantly, it had a unique crystalline structure, almost like a microscopic engineered bead. This wasn't explosive residue. This wasn't lab dust. This wasn't even a fragment of Thorne's own high-tech equipment. It was a unique, non-lab-related trace element. This, I said, my voice low, doesn't belong in Thorne's lab or any lab I know. The medical examiner's expression tightened. So not a straightforward accident then. No, I confirmed, my gaze fixed on the spectral data. This changes things. This points to external involvement. My mind raced. A particle this small, found under a fingernail, suggested close contact. A struggle, perhaps, or a last-ditch effort to collect evidence. The implications were chilling. Later, as the medical examiner continued her meticulous work, I stepped away to confer with the lead detective, a gruff man named Miller who was overseeing the wider investigation. He was poring over initial interview reports. "Anything solid on the cause?" Miller inquired, without looking up from his tablet. "The initial findings are consistent with the blast," I stated, "but I've found some anomalies. A very specific non-lab-related trace element on Thorne's person and some unusual burn patterns. It's early, but it's starting to look less like an accident and more like something else." Miller finally looked up, his brow furrowed. "Something else? You mean murder?" "I'm not ruling anything out yet," I answered carefully, "but the evidence suggests a deliberate act, not a tragic miscalculation or suicide." Grunted, then gestured to his tablet. "Well, if it is, we've got a couple of names floating around already. Thorne wasn't exactly known for his charm or his collaborative spirit." "Who?" I prompted. "First, there's Dr. Silas Vance," Miller began, scrolling through a file. "Another bioengineer, runs a competing research division at a rival firm. Apparently, he and Thorne had a rather public and acrimonious falling out over a patent dispute a few months back. Vance accused Thorne of intellectual theft. Thorne called Vance an incompetent hack. Standard academic rivalry, but it got pretty heated. I filed the name away. Academic rivalries could turn vicious, especially when groundbreaking research and millions were on the line. Then there's a former research assistant," Miller continued, tapping another entry. "A young woman named Maya. She worked for Thorne for about 2 years until he was abruptly let go 6 months ago. Word is, she felt exploited, that Thorne took credit for her contributions without proper acknowledgement. She'd been vocal about her resentment, apparently, even threatened legal action at one point. A disgruntled former employee with a motive of revenge or perceived injustice. Both plausible, both with reasons to resent Thorne's competitive and secretive nature. The pieces were starting to form a nebulous picture, one far more complex and sinister than a simple lab accident. The unique trace element, the specific burn pattern, and now these initial leads, my suspicions were deepening with every passing minute. This wasn't just a fire, it was a carefully orchestrated act, and I was just beginning to scratch the surface of its dark design. The hum of the servers inside the mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene was a steady, low thrum against my eardrums, a mechanical heartbeat in the silence. It was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind in Thorne's lab, a sterile bubble of logic and data. I hunched over the main workstation, my fingers flying across the keyboard, the glow of the triple monitors reflecting in my glasses. Thorne's encrypted hard drives sat in their bays, each one a potential Pandora's box. That microscopic trace, the unusual burn pattern they kept replaying in my mind, little whispers of doubt that wouldn't let me settle for accident. Bypassing Thorne's security protocols was a meticulous dance. He'd built an intricate digital fortress, a testament to his reclusive nature. Layers of encryption, redundant firewalls, a labyrinth of access logs designed to deter even the most determined intruder. But I wasn't an intruder. I was an investigator, and my job was to peel back those layers, one bite at a time. The first few directories were standard research files, published papers, grant applications, administrative documents. Then I hit the hidden partition, a directory simply labeled Project Chimera. My eyebrows lifted. Not exactly subtle for a top-tier bioengineer, but perhaps that was the point, a defiant, almost playful nod to the controversial nature of his work. Inside, I found what I'd been looking for: advanced genetic sequencing data. It wasn't just theoretical. There were experimental logs, gene expression profiles, detailed schematics for protein synthesis. This wasn't just about understanding life. It was about rewriting its very code. Thorne wasn't just pushing boundaries. He was trying to redraw them entirely. I dove deeper, my concentration absolute. The sheer volume of data was staggering, but my eye was trained to spot the anomalies. And they were there, subtle at first. Fragmented log entries, unusual timestamps on a series of nested directories, then a string of files with corrupted headers that shouldn't have been corrupted. This wasn't a system crash. This was deliberate. I used a recovery tool, a proprietary piece of software I developed myself, designed to reconstruct even the most aggressively deleted data. The program word, its progress bar crawling, and slowly, the ghostly outlines of deleted project files began to reappear. These weren't just any files. They were the core research files for Project Chimera, the ones detailing the most sensitive aspects of the genetic sequencing. Someone hadn't just tried to delete them. They'd attempted a sophisticated wipe, a multi-pass overwrite designed to make recovery impossible. Only someone intimately familiar with Thorne's digital architecture, or with extremely advanced tools, could have pulled it off, and they hadn't quite succeeded. A tap on the door of the unit made me jump. I'd lost track of time. It was the detective ushering in Thorne's assistant. Maya, I remembered her name from the initial briefing. She looked even more fragile than he had at the scene, her face pale, her eyes wide and bloodshot. He clutched a crumpled tissue in his hand, him gripped tight. "Reed, this is Thorne's assistant," the detective said, his voice low. "He's agreed to answer a few more questions." I nodded, gesturing to the chair opposite my workstation. "Thank you for coming, Maya. Take a seat." She sat stiffly, her gaze flickering around the cramped space, avoiding my eyes. Her hands trembled slightly. Thorne's work was incredibly important. We need to understand everything we can. I've been looking through his digital files. Can you tell me anything about Project Chimera? She flinched at the name. It was his passion project, very secretive. He didn't let anyone but me access the main servers for it, and even then only for routine backups. She wrung the tissue in her hands. Did Dr. Thorne ever express concerns about the security of his research? I questioned, watching her closely. About anyone trying to access it? Her gaze finally met mine, and there was a flicker of genuine fear there. He was different lately, very on edge. He started installing extra cameras, even in his private office, though he never told me why, said it was routine maintenance. She swallowed hard. He thought someone was watching him, trying to get his work. Did he say who? She shook her head, her eyes darting away again. No, just they. He became very paranoid. Locked himself in the lab for days sometimes, wouldn't even answer calls. He said his work was too important to fall into the wrong hands. He was convinced someone wanted to steal it, or worse, weaponize it. Weaponize it. It echoed the possibilities I just uncovered in the recovered files. Did he ever mention any specific threats? Any rivals, former colleagues, anyone who might have wanted his research for their own gain? He had many rivals, she responded, a bitter edge to her voice. He wasn't an easy man to work with, very competitive. He pushed people away, but specific threats? No, just the feeling that they were closing in. He hugged herself, a shiver running through him, thin frame despite the climate-controlled unit. He was terrified, Reed. It wasn't just the death of her employer. It was the lingering shadow of Thorne's paranoia, a paranoia that now, with the evidence of a sophisticated data wipe, seemed terrifyingly justified. Someone had been closing in, and they hadn't just wanted his research, they'd wanted him gone. The hum of the spectral analyzer was a comforting drone inside the mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene, a stark contrast to the biting wind that periodically rattled the vehicle's reinforced shell. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath misting slightly on the cool glass. Outside, The landscape was a blur of early morning mist and skeletal trees. But in here, under the focused glare of the task lights, my world narrowed to pixels and data points. The microscopic trace, barely visible to the naked eye, had been painstakingly lifted from a minuscule scorch mark on the lab's reinforced floor, a few feet from where Thorne's body had been found. It was an anomaly, a tiny speck of something that didn't belong in a bioengineering lab, especially one as meticulously clean as Thorne's. My gut had tightened the moment I'd seen it, a whisper that this wasn't just a tragic accident. I watched the machine work, a ballet of photons and detectors. The sample, vaporized by a focused laser, released its constituent elements, each broadcasting a unique spectral signature. The computer processed the information, comparing the unknown against a vast library of known substances. The first few results flashed by: silicon, oxygen, carbon expected in almost any environment. Then the screen flickered, a new set of peaks emerging, sharper, more defined. My eyes narrowed. The pattern was distinct, almost elegant in its complexity. The system ran a cross-reference, a progress bar inching across the bottom of the display. I felt a slow, deliberate thrum begin in my chest. This was it. The moment where a hunch either solidified into fact or evaporated into thin air. Match found. The words glowed on the screen, accompanied by a detailed chemical breakdown. My gaze skipped past the formula, straight to the name. Rare, synthetic fluoropolymer composite designated Omniflex 7. Omniflex 7. The name resonated with a specific kind of dread. It wasn't just a polymer, it was a brand. My mind immediately pulled up the mental file. Omniflex 7 was a proprietary material, known for its extreme heat resistance, chemical inertness, and incredible durability. It was used in high-end industrial applications, aerospace components, specialized medical devices, and crucially, advanced robotics and manufacturing equipment. It was expensive, difficult to work with, and absolutely had no business being in Thorne's biological research lab, unless it was part of some device I hadn't yet identified. But the scorch mark suggested it had been present at the point of catastrophic failure, not just a stray piece of equipment. This wasn't a lab accident. This wasn't suicide. This was something far more deliberate, far more intricate. The trace wasn't from a component within Thorne's experiment. It was from something foreign, something that had been introduced. The previous chapter's data wipe, the assistant's fear, Thorne's paranoia, it all clicked into a terrifying new picture. Someone hadn't just killed Thorne. They'd used a piece of advanced technology, possibly even a weapon, made from this very specific, very rare material. And Omniflex 7 was patented by OmniCorp. OmniCorp, the sprawling conglomerate with tentacles in everything from consumer electronics to heavy industry, and a notorious reputation for aggressive R&D acquisition. They were one of the primary financial backers of Thorne's groundbreaking, world-changing research. The initial theories of a disgruntled colleague or academic rival now felt flimsy, almost childish, against the weight of this corporate behemoth. I sat back, the plastic seat creaking under my weight. My mind raced, connecting the dots. OmniCorp's funding, their history, the advanced nature of this polymer, and the sophistication of the data wipe. This wasn't just a murder. It was an industrial assassination, meticulously planned to look like a tragic miscalculation. Get me the OmniCorp liaison for the Thorne project. I instructed the detective on the other end. Tell them it's urgent. I need them here now. It took nearly 2 hours for the liaison to arrive. He was a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair slicked back. His name was given as Arthur Vance. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his tie, his gaze sweeping over the scene with unpracticed, almost dismissive air. "Investigator Reed," he said, extending a hand that felt surprisingly soft in mine. His smile was wide, almost too wide, revealing perfect white teeth. "Arthur Vance, OmniCorp's dedicated liaison to Dr. Thorne's project. I understand you have some pressing questions." We stood by the rear of the mobile unit, the wind whipping around us, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and something metallic. I watched him closely, noting the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted from me to the activity around the lab entrance, even as his demeanor remained outwardly composed, almost jovial. "Mr. Vance," I began, my voice even. "We've identified a unique trace element at the scene. A rare, synthetic fluoropolymer composite, Omniflex 7. His smile faltered just for a fraction of a second, a tiny tremor at the corner of his mouth. Then it snapped back into place, even brighter, more forced. "Omniflex 7, you say? Fascinating. A remarkable material, truly. Our proprietary blend. What an interesting discovery. How might that relate to Dr. Thorne's unfortunate passing?" "That's what I'm trying to determine," I said, letting my gaze linger on his. "Omniflex 7 isn't standard lab equipment. It's for specialized industrial applications. Do you have any insight into why it might be present in Dr. Thorne's lab, especially near the point of the explosion?" He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie again, a nervous habit. "Well, Dr. Thorne was a genius, as you know. His work was groundbreaking, revolutionary. It wouldn't surprise me if he was experimenting with novel materials for some aspect of his research, perhaps integrating advanced components into his biological constructs. Though I must admit I wasn't aware of any specific plans to use Omniflex 7. He paused, then added, "But he was quite secretive even with us, his benefactors, a true independent spirit." His explanation was too smooth, too readily available. He offered it with an air of complete cooperation, leaning in slightly, his voice earnest. Yet the evasiveness was palpable. He was giving me an answer, but not my answer. He was deflecting, redirecting, painting Thorne as an eccentric genius whose unpredictable actions might explain away the anomaly. "OmniCorp fully supports your investigation, investigator," he continued, his voice dripping with professional concern. "Anything we can do to assist, any data you require, any personnel you wish to speak with, just say the word. We're as eager as anyone to understand this tragedy. Dr. Thorne was a valuable asset, a visionary. His loss is immeasurable." His words were textbook corporate condolence delivered with practiced ease. But the subtle shift in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tensing of his shoulders when I mentioned Omniflex 7, told a different story. He was overly cooperative, offering everything, yet revealing nothing of substance. He wasn't just a liaison, he was a gatekeeper. And behind that gate, I suspected, lay a far more intricate and dangerous web of connections than I had ever anticipated. This wasn't just about Thorne's death anymore. It was about what Thorne knew and what OmniCorp stood to gain or lose. The tension in the air was no longer just the cold wind. It was the chilling realization that I was now squarely in the crosshairs of a very powerful entity. The executive's overly smooth demeanor kept replaying in my mind, a subtle discord in an otherwise polished performance. He'd been too eager to please, too quick to offer full cooperation, yet his eyes had tightened fractionally at the mention of Omniflex 7. That tiny tell, that flicker of something he tried to suppress, had lodged itself firmly in my thoughts. I knew it. He knew something more, something he wasn't sharing. I was driving back to the lab, the old sedan rattling slightly over the access road's uneven asphalt. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, but the shadows were already long and hungry. My mind was still sifting through the layers of corporate gloss, trying to find the rough edges. I needed to get back to the mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene, dive back into the polymer's composition, see if I could trace its origin. A sudden, jarring blare ripped through the quiet evening. Headlights, blinding and aggressive, filled my rearview mirror. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my eyes darting to the side mirror. A large, dark SUV was riding my bumper, its engine growling. I sped up slightly, trying to create some distance, but it matched my pace, staying unnervingly close. This wasn't just impatient driving. This felt deliberate. The road curved sharply ahead, a blind corner with dense trees pressing in. Just as I started to brake, the SUV swerved, not to pass but directly towards my left rear fender. I instinctively yanked the wheel hard to the right, the tires squealing in protest as my sedan fishtailed precariously close to the ditch. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I wrestled the car back into control, my grip tight on the steering wheel. The air in the sedan was thick with the smell of burning rubber and adrenaline. A near miss, too close to be accidental. My mind raced, trying to dismiss it as a random act of road rage, but the timing felt off. Right after leaving the executive's office, right when I was starting to feel like I was onto something, I pulled into the temporary parking area beside the mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene, my hands still trembling slightly. I sat there for a moment, just breathing, trying to regain my composure. Coincidence or a warning? I chose the latter. My gut, a reliable compass in these situations, told me this wasn't random. Someone was watching. Stepping out, I scanned the perimeter, my gaze lingering on the dense tree line. Nothing stirred. I unlocked the rear door of the unit, the familiar click echoing in the stillness. The interior lights hummed to life, casting a stark glow over my meticulously organized workspace. I moved to my main workbench, my eyes automatically checking the arrangement of my tools, the placement of the samples. Everything looked untouched. The microscope sat ready, its lens cap on. The trays of evidence, labeled and secured, were exactly where I'd left them. But then my gaze snagged on something. My personal laptop, usually shut and tucked securely under the edge of the workbench, was slightly ajar. I always closed it with a definitive snap, a habit ingrained over years of field work. I walked over, my movements slow, deliberate. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the lid. No visible damage, no forced entry. I pushed it open further. The screen flickered to life, displaying the login prompt. A small, almost imperceptible detail hit me. The battery indicator, usually near full after charging overnight, was down by a few percentage points. Someone had been here. Someone had turned it on. My breath hitched. They hadn't just been outside, they'd been inside. My secure unit, my personal space. They hadn't taken anything obvious, hadn't left any blatant signs of tampering. They were careful, professional. This wasn't a random break-in. This was a message. The near miss on the road, and now this. It wasn't just a dangerous truth I was uncovering, it was a personal danger. I snatched it up, my heart still racing. It was Maya. Him name flashed on the screen. An unexpected call at this hour. "Reed, I need to talk to I," she blurted out, her voice thin and reedy, laced with a fear I could practically taste. "I know I shouldn't have called, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. I'm scared." My focus sharpened. "Maya, what is it? Are I all right?" "No, I'm not. I keep seeing things, remembering things," she stammered, her words tumbling out in a rush. "About Dr. Thorne before it happened. What kind of things?" I pressed, my mind already racing, connecting her fear to the recent incidents. This wasn't a coincidence either. Lights in the lab, and I saw them, not Dr. Thorne's car, a different car, and then a figure tall going into the lab after hours, sometimes for hours. My grip tightened on the phone. An unknown individual. I saw them enter Thorne's lab. Yes, more than once, I thought. I thought maybe it was a new researcher, or someone Dr. Thorne was collaborating with secretly. He was always so private, but after what happened, it just keeps playing in my head. Who was it, Reed? The custom polymer, the executive's reaction, the near miss, the breach of my lab, and now Maya's terrified confession. Thorne hadn't been alone in his final days. Someone else had access. Someone else was intimately familiar with the lab, its intricacies, and Thorne's groundbreaking work. The sophisticated and deliberate act of murder suddenly looked far less impossible. It looked like a certainty, and I was getting uncomfortably close to finding out who. The hum inside the mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene was a constant, low thrum, a mechanical heartbeat against the quiet of the night. Screens glowed around me, each one a window into the digital lifeblood of Thorne's lab. I'd been hunched over the main console for what felt like an eternity, my eyes burning, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a stubborn refusal to let go. My fingers danced across the holographic interface, sifting through terabytes of data, environmental logs, equipment diagnostics, security camera feeds, network traffic. It was all here, buried beneath layers of encrypted protocols, a digital fortress as intricate as the physical one Thorne had built. "Give me everything from the last 72 hours before the incident," I murmured, my voice raspy. The system, a beast of my own design, responded with a cascade of data streams. I focused on the environmental controls first. Pressure, temperature, gas mixtures, the very air Thorne breathed in that lab was meticulously regulated. My initial sweep showed everything within nominal parameters, then a sudden, jarring anomaly. A dip. A precise, almost imperceptible drop in the atmospheric pressure within the main chamber, followed by a rapid, equally precise restoration. It lasted less than 3 seconds, too quick to trigger a general alarm, too subtle for Thorne to consciously notice amidst his work. My brow furrowed. That wasn't a random fluctuation. Systems like these didn't hiccup with such surgical precision. I flagged the timestamp, then cross-referenced it with the gas mixture logs. There it was. Concurrent with the pressure dip, a fractional, temporary reduction in the inert nitrogen levels, compensated by an equivalent, brief spike in oxygen. Still within the safe operating envelope, but definitely a deviation. A perfectly timed breath taken from the lab's air, then returned. What was the point? My gaze drifted to the schematic of Thorne's bespoke polymer synthesizer displayed on a secondary screen. This wasn't off-the-shelf equipment. It was custom-built, designed to handle highly specific reactions under precise atmospheric conditions. Thorne had shared enough of his research with me to know the delicate balance required. Any deviation, however minor, could have cascading effects on his volatile compounds. I pulled up the synthesizer's internal diagnostics, filtering for events matching the pressure dip's timestamp. Nothing immediate. No error codes, no system warnings. The machine had continued its operation, seemingly unaffected. That was the trick, wasn't it? The subtle, unalarming manipulation. But then, an hour later, something else. A power surge, recorded not as an external grid fluctuation but as an internal spike originating from the synthesizer's primary energy conduit. It wasn't a short circuit. It was a deliberate, controlled overload, ramping up current far beyond its operational limits for a fraction of a second, then immediately normalizing. This had to be it. This was the trigger. I zoomed in on the data. The power spike occurred precisely when the synthesizer was midway through a critical phase of its polymer creation process. Thorne had been working on a new type of organic conductive polymer, one that was highly sensitive to localized energy fields. I remembered his excited, rambling explanation of its unique crystalline structure. If that structure was destabilized during its formation, particularly in an oxygen-enriched environment, even a subtly enriched one, the pieces clicked, cold and sharp. This wasn't a malfunction. This was an orchestration. I switched to the overall lab security logs, looking for any external access, any remote commands. My fingers flew, bringing up the network traffic analysis. And there it was, hidden deep within a cascade of routine system updates and diagnostic pings. An outbound data burst, a very specific sequence of commands, timestamped to initiate the pressure and gas alteration. It originated from an encrypted channel, bouncing through a series of anonymous proxies, but the command structure itself was unmistakable. A direct override to the lab's environmental control system, executed remotely. The initial pressure dip, the subtle atmospheric tweak that was stage 1. A preconditioning making the lab's environment a prime chamber, a slow-burning fuse. Thorne, engrossed in his work, would have felt nothing, seen nothing on his local readouts. Then stage 2, the remote command initiating the precise power surge in the synthesizer. Not a random event, but a targeted attack on a specific piece of equipment during a specific, vulnerable phase of Thorne's highly specialized work. That surge, coupled with the slightly oxygen-rich atmosphere, would have been the catalyst. The volatile polymer reaction, already delicately balanced, would have gone critical instantly. And finally, stage 3, the catastrophic explosion, mimicking a research malfunction, an accident. The lab systems, overwhelmed by the sudden breach, would then have done exactly what they were designed to do: compensate, flood the area with inert gas, seal off the chamber. But by then it was too late for Thorne. I leaned back in the chair, the glow of the screens reflecting in my eyes. It wasn't just murder, it was an act of brutal, calculated brilliance. The killer hadn't just understood the lab systems, they understood Thorne's specific research, his daily protocols, the precise vulnerabilities of his cutting-edge work. They knew exactly how to weaponize his own genius against him, making the lab turn on its creator. This wasn't some random hit. This was personal, intimate. Someone had watched Thorne, studied his every move, meticulously planned his demise down to the millisecond. And they had done it all without ever stepping foot inside that lab when the event occurred. The sophistication of it sent a shiver down my spine, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The executive's panic, Maya's fear, the custom polymer trace, it all came roaring back, fitting perfectly into this terrifying new picture. The executive with his corporate secrets. Someone had weaponized Thorne's own intellectual property, turning his groundbreaking research into a fatal trap. I had my how. Now, the terrifying question remained: who could possess such an intimate, deadly knowledge? The list, I realized with a grim certainty, just got a lot shorter and infinitely more dangerous. The game had just escalated and I was deep in the killer's territory. My fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, the projected interface shimmering in the dim confines of the mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene. I'd been sifting through the network traffic analysis, a digital ocean of data, following a hunch. The previous night, I'd found something tucked deep within a cascade of routine requests and automated system checks, a tiny ripple in the otherwise calm flow. Now, with a fresh cup of lukewarm coffee beside me, I zoomed in. The ripple wasn't a random spike, but a series of microbursts, originating from an external IP address, carefully masked to appear as internal diagnostic pings. It was sophisticated, almost artistic in its deception. Someone had used an advanced tunneling protocol, burrowing through the lab's security like a ghost. This wasn't just about accessing data. It was about manipulating the environment, about orchestrating the illusion of an accident. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. The complexity of the kill method, the layers of misdirection, the sheer effort involved, it all screamed something more profound than simple intellectual property theft. If the killer just wanted Thorne's research, they could have copied it, stolen the hard drives, or simply abducted him, but they didn't. They eliminated him, and then meticulously scrubbed the scene, leaving behind a carefully crafted narrative of a tragic mishap. Why go to such lengths? The unusual burn patterns, the microscopic trace of an inert gas not naturally occurring in the lab, the precise timing of the system failures. It all pointed to a deliberate, controlled event designed to look chaotic. This wasn't about taking Thorne's work. It was about stopping it, preventing its completion, or more chillingly, preventing its public release. I leaned back in the swivel chair, the plastic creaking under my weight. If someone wanted to stop Thorne, they must have known what he was on the verge of discovering or revealing. What could be so critical, so dangerous, that it warranted such an elaborate and deadly cover-up? I pivoted my focus, abandoning the network logs for Thorne's personal research files. I had already scanned his public-facing directories, his published papers, his ongoing project notes. All brilliant, all groundbreaking, but nothing that screamed, "Kill me now." I needed to dig deeper into the places he might have kept his most sensitive thoughts, his private observations. Thorne was a creature of habit, meticulous to a fault. He would have left a trail even if he tried to hide it. I remembered the odd, almost nostalgic feel of his office, the way he'd organized his physical books. He valued knowledge, documentation. He wouldn't just think something important. he'd write it down. I began sifting through the obscure corners of his personal server, checking system directories usually ignored by the casual browser, looking for files with unusual extensions, or those hidden within seemingly innocuous folders. The hum of the server racks in the unit was a constant drone, a white noise against the sharp click of my mouse. My eyes scanned lines of code, directory trees scrolling past in a dizzying blur. Then I saw it, tucked within a subdirectory named Archive Drafts. A folder that should have contained old, discarded papers was a single, unusually large file. Its name was Ethos Chronicle, log. No standard extension, no obvious file type. My gut tightened. This was it. I tried to open it. Access denied. Encrypted, of course. Thorne wouldn't make it easy. The encryption algorithm wasn't standard either. It was a bespoke creation, likely something Thorne had designed himself to protect his most sensitive data. A smirk touched my lips. Clever man. "All right, Thorne," I muttered to the empty unit. "Let's see what you were so desperate to keep secret." My fingers flew again, pulling up my decryption tools, a suite of programs honed over years of digital forensics. I started with common passwords, then moved to dictionary attacks based on Thorne's known interests, his birth date, his deceased wife's name. Nothing. This wasn't a simple password. This was a key, a phrase, a pattern. I remembered the intricate mathematical diagrams etched into his whiteboard, the complex symbols he doodled in the margins of his physical notebooks. He had a unique way of thinking, a specific logic. It hit me. His research wasn't just about biology. It had a significant computational component. He was a bioengineer, but also a cryptographer in his own right. I pulled up the system logs of the Ethos Chronicle. Log file itself. When was it last modified? Who accessed it? The file had been created almost 6 months ago and last modified just 2 days before his death. Only Thorne's user ID had ever touched it. My eyes flickered to the metadata. There was a small, almost invisible string of characters embedded in the file's creation timestamp. It looked like random noise, but it was too structured. I fed the string into a pattern recognition algorithm, cross-referencing it with the unique identifiers Thorne used in his public key cryptography. A small green light blinked on my screen. A match. The decryption key wasn't a word. It was a sequence derived from his own cryptographic signature, embedded within the file's very DNA. A subtle, almost arrogant way of ensuring only he could unlock it. The file opened, revealing pages upon pages of raw text, a personal journal disguised as a research log. I scrolled rapidly, my eyes devouring the words. Entry 147. My discoveries, once purely academic, now carry a terrifying potential. The cellular regeneration sequence intended for therapeutic use can be twisted. OmniCorp's interest has shifted. Their separate project is no longer theoretical. It is active, clandestine, and funded by my research's weaponized applications. My breath hitched. OmniCorp, the corporate giant that funded Thorne's lab. Entry 151. The ethical lines have blurred beyond recognition. My original intent, healing, has been perverted. They are not merely interested in my findings. They are actively developing a variant, an accelerated, targeted bioweapon. I cannot allow this to proceed. Entry 158. I have gathered irrefutable proof. Data logs, financial transactions, internal communications. OmniCorp is leveraging my work to develop something truly monstrous. My public exposure of their activities is imminent. I will present my findings at the upcoming Global Bioethics Summit. The world needs to know. The words slammed into me like a physical blow. This wasn't about stealing research. It was about silencing a whistleblower. Thorne wasn't just a brilliant scientist. He was a moral compass about to expose a colossal corporate crime. The motive, so complex and hidden, now stood starkly clear. The killer didn't want Thorne's work. They wanted to bury it, along with Thorne himself, before he could utter a single word. The stakes had just escalated from a lab accident to an international conspiracy. The hum of the servers in the mobile forensic unit at the remote crime scene was a constant, low thrum against my ears, a counterpoint to the racing thoughts in my head. Outside, the early morning light was just beginning to paint the sky in muted grays and purples, but inside, it was a world of glowing screens and focused intensity. The previous night's revelation about Thorne, the whistleblower, had rearranged every piece of the puzzle I'd meticulously assembled. This wasn't just a murder. It was an assassination designed to silence. That understanding hardened my resolve, sharpening my focus to a razor's edge. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my shoulders, my eyes still scanning the main display. The lab's intricate blueprints were overlaid with sensor data, flow charts of Thorne's bioreactors, and the forensic breakdown of the explosion site. The sheer complexity of the sabotage, the way it mimicked a catastrophic accident, spoke volumes. This wasn't a clumsy, desperate act. This was precision. This was an inside job orchestrated by someone who understood Thorne's work intimately, someone who could walk through that lab blindfolded and still know where to place the critical failure points. Okay, read, I muttered to myself, pushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. If Thorne was about to expose something massive, who would have the most to lose, and more importantly, who had the means? I brought up the lab's digital access logs. Every swipe card, every biometric scan, every keycode entry for the past 6 months. The list was daunting, stretching back thousands of entries. But I wasn't looking for a single anomalous entry. I was looking for a pattern of access, an overlap of opportunity and expertise. My fingers danced across the keyboard, filtering, cross-referencing. I needed to identify anyone with regular, unimpeded access to Thorne's specific research area, especially the highly sensitive bioreactor suite. The initial filter narrowed the list significantly, primarily to Thorne's immediate research team and senior lab personnel. But even that was too broad. I knew the specific point of failure, the precise manipulation that led to the explosion. It wasn't just about general access. It was about specialized knowledge. I began pulling up employee profiles, focusing on their educational backgrounds, their previous projects, their certifications. I needed someone with a deep understanding of advanced bioengineering, someone who could predict the cascade failure of Thorne's unique system. As I sifted through the data, a clear picture started to emerge. Many had the access, some had the scientific background, but very few possessed the specific, granular expertise required to orchestrate such a sophisticated, targeted act of sabotage. It wasn't enough to know how to make something explode. It was about making it explode in a way that erased specific data, destroyed specific samples, and looked like an accident. My eyes snagged on a name that had surfaced repeatedly in the access logs, always with legitimate reasons for being there. The OmniCorp liaison. He had been present during several key equipment upgrades, critical safety inspections, and even some of Thorne's more sensitive presentations. His profile listed him as an operational efficiency specialist, a vague title, but one that granted him a surprising level of access and oversight within the lab. I clicked on his detailed profile. David Thorne, no relation to the deceased, appeared on the screen. I remembered him from the initial scene walkthrough, a composed figure, seemingly helpful but with an almost unsettling calm. His eyes had been too sharp, his questions too precise for a mere liaison. My gut churned with a familiar intuition. I started digging deeper into his past. OmniCorp's internal records were extensive, almost overwhelmingly so. But I wasn't looking for his current job description. I was looking for what came before, and there it was, buried under layers of corporate jargon and redacted project names. A previous career in corporate risk management, with a significant stint in international asset protection. Those were polite terms, I knew, for something far more aggressive. I cross-referenced those terms with public records, with archived news articles, with industry whispers I'd picked up over the years. The pieces started to click into place with an unnerving precision. International asset protection often involved intelligence gathering, counterespionage, even covert operations in the corporate world, the kind of work that demanded a specific skill set. Discretion, technical proficiency, and a ruthlessness cloaked in professionalism. Then, a specific article flashed across my screen, a decade-old piece from a financial journal, detailing a high-profile scandal involving stolen intellectual property from a competing biotech firm. The article mentioned an anonymous corporate operative who had been instrumental in recovering the stolen data and neutralizing the rival's efforts. While no name was explicitly given, the timeline and the skill set described perfectly matched the OmniCorp liaison's obscured past. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a corporate liaison. This was someone with a background in neutralizing threats, someone who understood how to make problems disappear without a trace. And if Thorne was about to expose OmniCorp, then Thorne was a threat. The sophisticated sabotage, the meticulous cover-up, the deliberate mimicry of an accident, it all suddenly made terrifying sense. This man wasn't just a prime suspect. He was likely the architect of Thorne's destruction. The tension in the mobile unit was palpable, thick with the weight of this new understanding. I had my inside man, and he was far more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. The hum of the environmental control unit in the mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene was a constant low thrum against the late-night quiet. Outside, the world was a black canvas, but inside, under the stark LED lights, every surface gleamed with purpose. I'd been staring at the lab's digital access logs for hours, the screen a dizzying scroll of timestamps and ID. My eyes had blurred, then refocused, then blurred again. The pattern I'd been chasing wasn't in who was there, but when they weren't and what tiny window of opportunity that created. It was a whisper of an idea, a fleeting shadow in the data, but it was enough. I leaned back in my chair, the plastic protesting faintly. My colleague, a junior analyst, was meticulously cataloging some lesser samples at a nearby workstation. Perfect. I know, I began, my voice deliberately louder than necessary, a casual observation thrown into the sterile air. I'm almost certain I've isolated the exact catalyst responsible for the exothermic reaction. It's a variant of a proprietary compound Aris Thorne was developing, a highly specific bioaccelerant. If my preliminary analysis is correct, it ties directly into his final project, suggesting the entire incident was a catastrophic, albeit ingenious, miscalculation on his part. I paused, letting the words hang. I'm prepping a detailed report for the lead detective tomorrow. It'll confirm the accident theory once and for all. I watched my colleague's head bob slightly in acknowledgement, his focus unwavering on his microscopic work. He wouldn't think anything of it, but I knew the walls had ears, especially when it came to information that could derail a carefully constructed narrative. I had planted the seed. The bioaccelerant was a red herring, a specific detail only someone intimately familiar with Aris Thorne's actual work and its weaponized counterpart would understand the true implications of. If it was indeed an accident, the information would be innocuous. If it wasn't, then my little breakthrough was a direct threat to the killer's carefully crafted illusion. The waiting was the hardest part. I busied myself, reviewing other unrelated evidence, trying to appear unconcerned, but every nerve ending was taut. The night crawled by. Just after 3 in the morning, a faint click echoed from the main entrance hatch. My head snapped up, my hand already hovering near the emergency comms button. The hatch hissed open, revealing a familiar silhouette against the dim glow of the exterior floodlights. It was David Thorne, Aris's brother. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes sweeping the interior. He hadn't expected me to be awake, let alone waiting. His face was a mask of strained politeness, but I could see the panic flicker behind his eyes. "Read," he said, his voice a low, almost practiced calm. I couldn't sleep, thought I'd check if I needed anything. A fresh pot of coffee. He gestured vaguely towards a thermos he held. "No need, David," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through me. "I'm just wrapping things up here." I gestured to the workstation where I'd left a mock-up of my findings displayed prominently on a secondary monitor, a complex molecular structure labeled Thorne's bioaccelerant, variant beta. It was pure fabrication, but it looked convincing. He walked further into the unit, his gaze drawn immediately to the screen. I watched him closely. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He moved towards my workstation, his eyes darting from the screen to me, then back to the screen. "That's interesting," he murmured, his voice a little too casual. "I've really narrowed it down then." He took another step, his hand moving subtly towards the keyboard. He was going to try and delete it or corrupt the file. "More than narrowed it down, David," I said, cutting him off, my voice now devoid of any pretense of casualness. "I've found something else too, something far more crucial." I stood up slowly, deliberately placing myself between him and the screen. The air in the unit thickened with unspoken tension. "What are I talking about?" His eyes were narrowed now, the polite facade completely gone. "The trace polymer," I stated, my voice low and firm. "The microscopic residue I found at the site of those other incidents. The ones that looked like accidents. The ones that happened to the OmniCorp researchers who voiced concerns about Aris's classified project." He flinched, a barely perceptible tremor. "I don't know what I read talking about, Reed. Those were unfortunate incidents, completely unrelated." "No, they weren't, and neither was Aris's death. The same polymer, a unique synthetic compound, was present at every scene, including Aris's lab. It's a signature, David, my signature." I pointed to the main screen where a side-by-side comparison now displayed. On one side, a high-resolution electron micrograph of the polymer found in Aris's lab. On the other, identical images from two other incident reports, pulled from OmniCorp's internal records, incidents that had been conveniently closed as unexplained equipment malfunctions. The match was undeniable, irrefutable. He stared at the screen, his face draining of color. The thermos slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor, the lukewarm coffee spreading across the linoleum. He didn't even notice. His shoulders slumped, defeat washing over him like a cold wave. Aris. He discovered what they were doing, what OmniCorp was really developing under the guise of medical breakthroughs. A bioweapon, Reed, silent, untraceable. He had compiled everything. He was going to blow the whistle. I remained silent, letting him talk, letting the confession pour out. The mobile forensic unit at remote crime scene, usually a place of meticulous analysis, had become a confessional booth. They tasked me with neutralizing him to prevent the leak. I was supposed to make it look like an accident, a tragic error in his own research. I knew his work, his protocols, the specific vulnerabilities of his lab systems. I used a modified variant of his own bioaccelerant, the one I found to trigger the catastrophic reaction. It was designed to mimic an uncontrolled runaway experiment. The polymer. It was from a delivery system, a specialized applicator. I thought I'd cleaned everything, every single trace. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading yet resigned. They promised me. They promised they'd protect me. Aris Thorne wasn't a victim of his own genius, but a casualty in a war he tried to fight alone. And David, his own brother, had been the weapon.